Okay, so now we're at the fun part. This is where we can allow the user to swipe left and right to accept or reject other users. So as always, at least from now on, I'm going to give you the challenge of setting that up, but I'm going to show you what we've got here. So first off, we've got a new view controller with a logout option. So that takes you back to the original screen, and then you can log back in if you want. Notice we had a default image there that was displayed very quickly before the new image of our user appeared. And then of course we can swipe left or right on the user and we get that fun animation. And if we swipe right here, then that user becomes accepted and we get another user. Similarly, if we swipe to the left, then we are faced with a new user and we can keep on going indefinitely. So that's what you're trying to make. You have all the skills that you need to make it. So best of luck. I hope it goes well. All right, I hope that went well. I'm going to start, as you might expect, over in main storyboard. I'm going to add a new view controller. Where we're zoomed in enough. There we go. And this view controller, I'm going to give a navigation bar up the top there with a title of Tinder. And we'll also have a logout bar button item. There we go, which will do a couple of things. So primarily, it's going to segue to the initial view controller. There we go. But also that particular segue we're going to use to, of course, actually log the user out. So to do that, we'll need to set up a new file for our view controller, which will be a subclass of UI view controller, and we'll call this the swiping view controller. And of course, we'll need to link that up to our new view controller. And then we can use a method that we've used before called prepare for segue. And this will be called whenever a segue takes place from this view controller. And we're going to check to see if the segue identifier is equal to logout segue, i.e. the segue I just created, then we'll log the user out. So pf user .logout, for which I'll need to import pass. I'll just check, I think that might have a capital O, there we go. Yep. Okay, and then I'm going to change over to user details view controller and initiate a segue from here to the swiping view controller. So we want it if the user has already entered their image and their other details, then we're going to want to navigate them over to the swiping view controller. So let's call that show swiping view controller. And we want that to happen firstly when they click the update button. So here we go. This is where everything's updated. So now we want to perform the segue. And the one with identifier show swiping view controller, sender being self. And we'll need to pop a self in front of that as well. And also, we don't want the user details view controller to be the first one a user sees if they've already updated their details. So I'm going to go back over to viewcontroller.swift where the initial segue happens. And here we now want to check to see if the user has already put in their details. And if they have, we want to show the swiping view controller instead of the user info view controller. So we've already got a way of testing that over in user details view controller. So let's copy that down. We don't need quite all of that. So I'm just going to do a check for each of these existing. So we'll check to see if that is not nil and that is not nil and the photo is not nil. And if all of those are not nil, then we'll jump to the swiping view controller. Otherwise, we'll jump to the user info view controller. So that should redirect us now to the swiping view controller because we've already set up all of these values. So let's just check that out. Make sure it works as desired. Ah yes, and we've got an error there, but that's okay. There's no segue with identifier show swiping view controller. That at least means it's doing the right segue, but the show swiping view controller comes from the user details view controller. So we're going to need to create a new segue from the initial view controller. And let's call that we'll call it swipe from initial segue. There we go. Okay, so let's try that now. The good news is, so let's try that now. The good news is it did correctly detect those three not being nil. And there we go. So we've now jumped to Tinder, and if we log out, that works fine as well. It doesn't redirect us back in because we're already logged out. Great. One small thing is that I want this to happen as well when the user logs in. So I'm going to create this as a method. I'll call it redirect user. And so we'll call it from view did appear. And we'll also call it from here, where the user logs in. There's not much point calling it from here. We could do, but here we know they're going to go to user info because they've only just signed up, so they can't possibly have given us their details. So I'm going to leave that one as is. Okay, so now it's time to edit our swiping view controller, and we'll start with the all-important image view. So we'll make that nice and big and in the center of the screen as well, maybe even a little bigger than that. And then we'll just add a little label underneath to make it clear what the user should do. So swipe left to reject, right to accept. There we go. And then we'll bring in our swiping view controller and create an outlet for our image view. Okay, so our next job then is to apply the dragging code that we made a couple of videos ago, which is just here, and apply that to our image. So let's just copy that over. I'll put it above view did load there. And we also need to set up our gesture but this time we're going to apply it to the image view rather than the label. Okay, and while we're testing that out, I'll put my default image in the image view so that we've got something to work with. And aspect fit. There we go. Okay, so let's check it out. We should now be able to drag the image left and right in the way that we did with the label a couple of videos ago. And here we go. Let's try it out. There we go. So you can see it's a little slow on the simulator here, but it is very much doing what we wanted it to. And if we drag to the right, with any luck, somewhere in all that code, we should see accepted. There we go, chosen. There it is. Excellent. Okay, so now we've got our swiping system set up. Now it's just a matter of getting the images from Parse Server and displaying them here. So let's do that in our swiping view controller. So let's start by just getting a collection of images from Parse Server and displaying those on our image. So I'm going to create a method called updateImage, which will call from viewDidLoad to get our first image updated, and then also we want to call it when the user has either chosen or not chosen someone as well. Okay, so we're going to start with a query, as you might imagine, and this is going to be a PF user query. In fact, we're storing pretty much all the data that we need in the user field for this particular app. Then we want to set a where key. So we want to see where is, just remind myself what I called it. So is female. And we want to set that to the preference of our user, which I'll get from here is pfuser.current and then is interested in women. So if this is true, that means they're interested in women. So we're looking for people who are female. And let's just check. We need to unwrap there. That is fine because we've already checked that by the time they've got to this page, they've already selected a preference. So secondly, we need to look for people that are interested in the gender of our user. So is interested in women, we want to set that equal to, and I'm going to copy it over again. Whether or not the current user is female. So if the current user is female, then this will be true. So we want is interested in women to be true as well. So for now, I'll leave the where keys at that, although we will shortly have to add where keys to avoid showing users that we've already accepted or rejected before. And to save resources, we'll only get one at a time. So then we'll take our query and find objects in the background with a block of hopefully objects. I think we should have optional there. So again, I'm going to ignore the error if there is one. So if let users equal objects, then we're going to loop through those. So for object in users, and then we'll check if let user equals object as PF user. So our usual process for getting the user data. And the main thing that we want here, of course, is the photo. So let's let the image file be equal to user photo, and we're going to forcecast that to a PF file, which we know will work because we saved it as a PF file on parse server. Then we're going to take our image file and get data in the background with a block, and we should get some data. We might get an error. So now we're going to check to see if let image data equal data. Then we'll set our image view dot image to be equal to a UI image from the data. Actually, let's use image data. So that in itself should get a user from the database who is female, and for Homer is interested in men, just one of them, and it will get the image and with any luck display it on the image view. There is a quick issue that we need to address before we run that, and that is going back to ACL again. You'll notice that all of these have public write access, but sadly they don't have public read access. So that means we're not able to get hold of them and get their data to display the message or the image to the user. So we need to just quickly go through and update those, and then we'll also update our ACL code so that all future users will get public read access as well. So now we should be able to both read and write, which importantly will allow us to get the data for the users and display a user, there we go, to Homer. Fabulous. Okay, so let's swipe right for Betty. And then you may have noticed there we did get chosen and it did attempt a new person, but of course the new person was the same as the old person, so it's just replaced the image with herself. So now we're going to need a way to store who's been accepted or rejected within our app. So we'll do that firstly where the user accepts or rejects, so just here. And the way I'm going to deal with these is I'm going to have a new column, which is going to be accepted, and this is going to be an array. Precisely, it's going to be an array of strings and strings of user IDs. And we're going to have a similar array for rejected. So this is where we'll keep track of the users that have been accepted or rejected by our user. So here is where we know that someone's been accepted or rejected. So I'm going to create a variable accepted or rejected, which is initially going to be an empty string. And then if the user drags to the left, we'll set accepted or rejected to rejected. And if they drag to the right, we'll set accepted or rejected to accepted. And then we'll check here to see if accepted or rejected is not an empty string, and if so, that means that someone has been accepted or rejected. So first off, we can change update image to be in there, so we don't have to have it twice, which is always nice. And then what we want to do is to add the current displayed user's ID to the accepted or rejected arrays on parse. So either here or here. So we're going to need the current user ID. So let's create a variable displayed user ID to represent that, and initially that'll just be an empty string. But when we have a new user here, we'll update that here. So self.displayed user ID is going to be user.object ID. So now we can access displayed user ID. I think I'm going to do a quick check just to make sure that displayed user ID is not empty, in case the user swipes before an image is generated. But then, if this is the case, we can update the current user, and we can use a parse function add unique objects from an array, so that we can add this to the accepted or rejected array. So it's either going to add it to rejected if they swiped left, or accepted if they swiped right. And the array that we want to add is just the array containing the current user's ID, or the displayed user ID here. So displayed user ID. So that will update the current user, and then we just need to save the current user. So save in background with a block. And that has success and error. And when that's done, we're going to update the image. And we may need a self in front of that. So let's just quickly try that out. We should now find that when we swipe left or right, then the user gets added to either rejected or accepted on parse. So let's give it a try. So we swipe right, and then let's have a look on parse if we update that. And there we go. You can see that user ID has been added to the accepted array. Of course, we still get the same user returned to us because we haven't checked for that being the case in our query. So now we need to check to see that the users that we're querying have not already been listed as accepted or rejected. So let's generate an array of what we might call ignored users which is a combination of accepted users and rejected users. So let's create a variable ignored users, which is going to be an array of strings. I'm actually going to start it off as just an empty string. And then we'll check to see if we've got any accepted users, which is in pfuser.current and then accepted. So if we've got any there, then we'll add those to our ignored users, which we can do using ignored users plus equals, and then accepted users. And we need to force cast that to an array, which should be fine because it is an array. And then the same for rejected users. So if let rejected users is equal to pfuser.current and then rejected, then we'll add that to ignored users as well. As an array. And then we can just add that to our query. And we want to check where the object ID, in fact, I'll do that again. And we want to check where the object ID is not contained in that array. So the object ID, and we want actually not contained in ignored users. So essentially that will search for users which are not in one of the two arrays, accepted or rejected. So now we should find that the list updates each time, and we get a new image each time we swipe. So here we go. So let's swipe right. And excellent. Now we've got someone new. I don't enjoy swiping left, but we have to test both sides. There we go. That's looking good. And oh, we've got a swipe right for Marge. Okay. So now let's have a look. And you can see that we've now got our array of accepted and rejected appearing correctly on the Parse dashboard. Wonderful. So there's a few ways you could make this user experience a little bit better. One would be to add an activity indicator to stop the user thinking that it hasn't provided a new user for them when it's just updating. Another would be, at this point, we've now got to the end of the people on the app, which is never ideal, but you might want to add a message or something saying no more users available, come back later. And you might even want to think about a way of getting some of these user details in advance. So we're getting them one at a time here, but you might want to preload some of the details. So maybe you get 10 users in one go, and then you always stay a few users ahead of the image that the user is currently looking at. And then you get a much smoother user experience rather than downloading the images on demand. But I'm going to leave those as challenges for you. All that remains for us is showing the user a list of people that they've accepted who have also accepted them and giving them an opportunity to contact each other. And that will do in the final video in this section coming right up.